Dr. Fahamu Pecou's 2020 short film, We Can't Cop Cars Without Seeing Cop Cars, and Anais Duplan's 2017 short film, Ode to the Happy Negro Hugging the Flag in Robert Colescott's George Washington Carver Crossing the Delaware, both offer through rich narrative symbolisms and the liberatory notion of RePose, visual and sonic representations of Black spiritual vibrancy that interrogate the high objectivity of the church, Euro-white supremacy, and the rule of law in their mutual construction of anti-blackness. Anais Duplan's multi-layered, disorienting video poem, conveying multiple interweaving stories and mental visuals through the use of yellow words from his poem of the same name in front of a black screen along with layered audios, expresses this interrogation through his practice of poem and translation, or the symbolic use of transcript as a medium to visually express poetics. Film gives transcripts unquestionable authority as visual representations of meaning conveyed in foreign language. Film sanctifies transcripts and, as a consequence, Euro-white supremacist methods of erasing Black and indigenous forms of knowledge via translation. On one hand, exploring further into the critical tool of transcripture reveals a hidden space of expression for the visual, literary, and spiritual representations of cultural critics and artists of the African diaspora. And all of this points to a larger practice of spiritual imaginative repurposing or transformation that permeates the works of all artists and cultural critics of the African diaspora. On the other hand, the critical tool reveals the deep relationships between the manufacture of Euro-white supremacist historical fantasies through written text or so-called history books and justifications of systems of imperialist capitalism, heteropatriarchy, and white nationalism as codified elements within sanctified Judeo-Christian scripture. Duplan's practice of poem and translation reclaims the space of the sanctified transcript for Black poetic liberation, and in doing so challenges the long history of linguistic dominations via state legislations prohibiting and or restricting the literacy, vocalization, and as a consequence political and legal representation of Black populations. Anais Duplan's minimalist video poem primarily utilizes transcripts and audio to interrogate and repurpose the sanctification of hegemonic methods of representing Black meanings so as to recenter Black spiritually triumphant poetics and visual thought. This differs from Dr. Fahamu Pecou's 2020 short film, We Can't Cop Cars Without Seeing Cop Cars, which makes use of color, lighting, camera angles, and dance gestures to interrogate the religious indisputability of the rule of law within American society and repurpose this sanctity to represent the Black spiritual imagination. All of these artistic practices and the meanings that emerge from them first appear in the introductory sequence of Pecou's film, where the audience's gaze circumnavigates a golden Crown Victoria and scepter in a public park as people pass by. Police forces historically used Crown Victoria and scepters as squad cars, indicating the car in the introductory sequence is a symbolic representation of the rule of law. Its golden color symbolizes divinity, wealth, and power, and these two visual symbolisms come together within this sequence through the use of camera angles that bring the sun's halo into frame just above the car's front. Pecou's piece interrogates the ways our society religiously holds up the punitive judicial system and racial capitalism as divine, while simultaneously using the interior of the car opened to the audience by a Black hand as a representation of the law's role in constructing the notion of race and the larger system of white supremacy. Pecou's piece then directly contrasts day with night, gold with blue light associated with the police, a public park in daylight with private apartments with lights out, gardens with graffiti, and a kinetic frame with a still frame, to create a desolate and isolated visual interrogating the way the state constructs punitive law as a private and personal matter. The dark apartment windows visually express an absence of witnesses and, by extension, the individualist perspective on judicial penalty. The state's individualized representation of punitive law facilitates the legal and social erasures of Black liberatory expressions and forms of knowledge. And blue light, reflecting off of graffiti on the side of a building, visually and symbolically represents this. The Bill of Rights' Fourth Amendment codifies this individualism with respect to the rule of law and penalty. The amendment legally protects the personal right against unreasonable searches and seizures. While the introductory sequence's use of blue and gold sets the precedent for how Pecou's piece interrogates the religious high objectivity associated with the rule of law, it also sets the precedent of visual vocabulary along with the color red, body gestures, and costume for how Pecou's piece represents the divinity of Black spiritual imagination. A key dance gesture throughout the piece that springboards Pecou's representation of the spiritual Black imagination is the waving of the hand, which symbolically represents both global diasporic efforts to survive the Middle Passage and colonization, as well as the domestic struggle for Black survival within larger legal systems of white nationalism. The blue sky background behind the hand symbolizes both of these meanings because of blue's association with both the white nationalist police state and the ocean. Additionally, the focus on this gesture leads the viewer's attention to a Black subject with eyes closed, signifying the spiritual Black imagination itself. This juxtaposition then gives meaning to the red frames earlier in the film as representations of closed eyelids in the midst of daydreaming. All of this connects back to Anais Duplan's liberatory notion of repose.
But the process eventually led to the extremely rich buying influence and then politicians in themselves to pass laws that guaranteed that the rich would not only remain rich.
While equally liberatory, the notion of repose serves a very different purpose within Anais Duplan's Ode to the Happy Negro. This piece directly cites Robert Colescott's 1975 painting, George Washington Carver Crossing the Delaware, where the religious divinity associated with the inherent anti-blackness of American imperialism is interrogated and taunted through the introduction of Black subjects in positions associated with the profane within the sanctified formal space of historical painting. Duplan's poem references a Black subject holding the flag in Colescott's painting in visual repose because of the positioning of a second subject beneath the flag. In a similar practice to Colescott's, Duplan's piece interrogates the hegemonic restrictions imposed on Black criticism of white supremacy through the overlay of laughing audio on top of class reductionist audio, whose every erasure of the white supremacist construction of capitalism triggers a fit of laughter.
Capitalism is class warfare. The function of the boss and the managerial class.
Additionally, this piece's use of nonlinear sculptural word art, made of poem and translation, further triumphs over Euro-white supremacist limitations placed on Black cultural criticisms. Black critics and artists will critique only on their terms, i.e., in repose. Repose in this piece is directly critical, in contrast to the protective and survival-focused nature of imaginative repose in Pecou's piece. This fluidity of the term is what makes it truly revolutionary.